Before we begin this week's episode, a warning that this interview includes suicidal ideation and mentions self-harm. If you or someone you know is doing it tough and needs someone to speak to, call Lifeline on 13 11 14. There's always someone at the end of the line.
A LiSTNR production.
May 24th is Stalking Awareness Day, Australia. Many people have no idea how prevalent stalking is in society. Some don't even know it's a crime, let alone what to do if you're stalked. McDonald is a stalking victim survivor. Her stalker ended up in prison as a result of Di's determination to have him punished for what he put her through. Di calls her former Victorian detective, Beck Norris, her guardian angel. Together, these two women worked to convict Di's stalker and to improve the skills and technology available to police to investigate and prosecute stalkers. I'm former police officer Brent Sanders. And for the past 25 years, I've dedicated myself to sharing what I've learnt on the force to the Australian public so they can better protect themselves from falling victim to crime. So with the help of some of the most respected current and former detectives and high-ranking law enforcement agents, we're going to pull back the curtain on what life is like on the force and what they've learned about how crime and criminals really work. These are real stories from real detectives. Di, could I take you back to October 2014? You were managing a retail store in Melbourne. Mm-hmm. You assisted a staff member who was dealing with a customer who you later came to know as Max Gardner. Could you take us sort of from there and just walk us through all of that?
So the very first time I met Max, he wanted something from the store, which we didn't have. And I went looking for whatever it was he wanted, but yeah, we didn't have any out the back or anything like that. And he came back in with a rose and a piece of paper thanking me. And I'm like, okay, I actually still have that rose for no particular reason other than, yeah, I still have it. So it kind of started from there. He kept coming in and asking me out for coffee. And coffee was literally 10 feet out the front. Gloria Jean's out the front door of work. I did eventually go because so many people in the centre knew him and said what a lovely guy he was and he'll spoil me and just if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. So I did eventually go on a coffee date with him. And then maybe a couple more, and then we eventually went out for dinner.
One of the things in the documentary that jumped off the page a little at me, Di, is you said in hindsight that you had a little bit of a gut instinct, a gut feeling about Max right from the get-go. Can you expand on that just a little for us?
I mean, working where I did, you get a lot of guys asking you out and hitting on you and whatever. And you've got to remember I was a lot younger then too. So that initial thing was like, oh no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to, because I didn't know who he was. I don't just go out on dates. I don't even do dating sites. So yeah, I was hesitant. But then everyone that knew him was giving him such a good rap that I kind of squashed those feelings.
Would it be fair to describe him in those initial days as he's quite charming, wasn't he? I think even the note that accompanied the rose that he gave you was quite sort of gushing, I suppose you would say, very charming.
Yeah. So the note that's on a Australian Story is actually the second note. I don't have the first one. I still have the rose, but I don't have the original note. I don't know what happened to that. So that first letter is actually the second letter he gave me, and he gave me a little Greek statue with that note.
So the initial meeting, October. Now, if we go to November, so we're just a month in, it was your birthday, and you went to a little wine bar that you and friends would occasionally go to. Max came along with you, and there's a few sort of cracks started to appear there, I think.
Oh, God, yeah. That was kind of a bizarre night. So we go there, my best friend Kathy and her partner, and he brought along 2 cakes. And, you know, I know everyone at the wine larder pretty well. We'd been going there for years at that point. And, yeah, so everyone's giving me a kiss, you know, happy birthday, happy birthday. And one friend who's actually gay kissed me on the mouth, and Max got really upset about that. And, yeah, my friend's like, I'm gay, mate, I'm not after her. Like, we kind of saw it as being funny, but he didn't. So it just kind of changed the whole mood of the night, and we left and walked back around the corner to Kathy's.
I guess you look at these things so differently, don't you? In hindsight, Di, with the benefit of hindsight, we can lay all these things out, and they appear to be quite obvious. But I guess also that there's a part of that you know, I'm sure he would have been presenting that as, oh well, I'm only feeling uncomfortable because I really like you and all that sort of stuff. He's wrapping it all up in his charm offensive, I would imagine.
Yeah. I can't actually remember what he said other than apologising. Like he would go out of his way to help people, like in your circle. There was one time at Kathy's, and I don't think it was that night, might have been a previous night, and he said, I smell gas at Kathy's house. And none of us could smell it. And he was so insistent on this gas smell. So Kathy did the right thing the next day and called the gas company, and they came out, and there was actually a gas leak. There's also hindsight for me in that as well, because I don't think that gas leak was just a gas leak.
That he created the scenario so you could sort of be the hero type of
so
thing.
he could be the hero. Yeah.
Christmas 2014. So you sort of had a relationship, I guess we could call it, for a couple of months, 2 to 3 months at that stage. Had Christmas at your sister's, and the following day, Boxing Day, there was a little bit of an incident.
Yeah, my son travelled down on the train from Marupna with his girlfriend and stayed overnight. And Max came and picked us up in the morning to take us to Broadmeadows train station, because the country train picks them up from there. And like, we all got out of the car, we got their luggage out of the car and started heading up to the platform. And I turned around and Max was not there. He's just standing by his car and fuming. He was actually getting quite angry, and I stopped and I went back, and I'm just like, what are you doing? And he said, well, you walked off on me. And I'm like, I'm just walking my son to the train station. Why didn't you just walk with us? So I just kind of grabbed his hand and walked back up to my son and his girlfriend and got them on the train. And then, the trip back to my place was, not great. So I'm just like, no one comes between me and my kids. I'd already had rules in place, so he wasn't allowed to stay overnight at my house because my youngest daughter was 16. So I didn't allow anyone in my home.
And you made a decision at that point as a result of that. Did you? Is it fair to say that you stepped away from the relationship at that point?
Yeah, I was quite annoyed, and I felt like he was wanting me to choose between him and my son. Bad move on his part.
So there was that breakup. A month or so later, Max sort of turns up at a licensed premises that you're at with, I think, friends, and I guess was apologetic, and one thing led to another, and did the relationship sort of come back together a little at that point?
It did. He came in and watched our friend Fabian play, and it took me a few more weeks before I took him back. But I was talking to him again after he turned up there. But also there was a strange thing that happened there. I had parked around the corner from where we were, and he walked around from where my car was parked. And I had driven, so I was taking Kathy back home, and one of the tyres felt weird. So we pulled it into a servo. I had a flat tyre. So I don't know. I'm just assuming that wasn't just a flat tyre either.
Well, again, with the benefit of hindsight,
I know.
He went on to have a number of interactions with vehicles, both yours and other folks close to you, didn't he?
Yes.
Valentine's Day, of course, for somebody of his ilk, Valentine's Day is an opportunity to lauder you with platitudes and one thing and another. So we're now sort of February 2015. I think from that point forward, he started to become extremely possessive, things like drive-bys past your house to make sure that you were there, appearing in places, just popping up where you were that would perhaps suggest he had some perhaps tracking device or some sort of knowledge of where you were going to be. Would that be fair to say?
I would say so. I didn't know it at that time. I had a weird thing happen. I picked my daughter up from her boyfriend's place, and she'd actually had something really odd happen to her, which involved a van. I haven't told anyone about this. So her boyfriend's stepdad actually saw the incident. She was walking to their place and this van was following her. So her boyfriend's stepdad went back and picked her up and took her back home. And then when I picked her up, there was this black van again. So I didn't want to go home. I drove past my street. As soon as I drove past my street, Max is on the phone. Oh, where are you going? What are you doing? So that was my first inkling that he had something. And I took a side street and pulled over. The black van actually followed, but then continued on when they saw I was on the phone. So that was my first inkling that, oh, that was weird that he knew that I kept going. I didn't just go home.
And you must have been at this time, I mean, I can only imagine what it's like. I guess it's sort of like just this slow, continual process where you're constantly on edge and you start to put these pieces together. There was if you like, almost a straw to break the camel's back, I think, where there was attack on your mum's house.
Yeah. So I had been over there with Mum, and then I was heading from Blackburn over to Brighton to go out with Kathy. And the neighbour in the street, now there's only 8 houses in my mum and dad's street, and I actually knew the person that was having the party. It was the 21st for her youngest. And Mum had rung to say that someone had thrown a rock through the windows. So at Mum and Dad's house, there's these massive windows for the lounge room and the bedroom. And I said, look, just call the police, Mum. I'll be on my way back. And then call George, who lives across the road. He'll come over and sit with you while I'm on my way. And by the time I got there, police had already been. George had been there with her. I went down to Kim's just to see if any of the partygoers had left. And she's like, no, that we were doing speeches at that time, so no one had left. But there was a second incident at the house. My mum had gone into care at this point, and my cousins were over from Adelaide and they were staying there. We had been to the football, so dropped them back at Mum's, and I was heading home. And when I got home, my home phone was ringing and they're like, someone's just thrown a cricket ball through the front window, and it was the same window. And they had given chase, and they said he ran but hobbled as he was running. He couldn't run properly and got in a white Commodore. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and drive past Max's. And there was no car in the driveway. and I went to Craigieburn Police, and there was a sign up saying contact Broadmeadows, and I thought, well, by the time Broady come out, even if they do, Max would be home and he would just deny it. You know. So I actually hid, or maybe to me I was hiding in a court off his street, but I could see if he was going to come home and what time, because I had in my head it'll be 1:30, 1:45 before he gets home. And it was on the clock in my car, it said 1:38 a.m. And I sat there for a few more minutes, and then I drove out of the court and went the other way out of his street. Yeah. So then I knew that the first attack was actually probably him as well.
You mentioned that description of him running away, and he had, I think, and I mention this only because it's pertinent to some of the CCTV footage from later incidences. He'd had a lower back injury. I think he was unemployed. He was on a sickness beneficiary, and he had quite an unusual sort of a gait, didn't he, both walking and running, which made him quite recognisable to you.
Yeah, so he had back surgery. He was working for Ford when this accident, in quotation marks, happened. He apparently fell down the stairs at Ford in Campbellfield, Somerton, and he took them to court, and Ford actually gave him a payout.
It was around this time, I think, Di, that you took the step of applying for an intervention order against Max. Is that right?
It took me a while to do that. There was an incident at my cousin's for his 60th, and it was after that, and that one was actually quite bad because so many other people were involved. So it was June before I went to apply for an intervention order, because police wouldn't help me. I'd ring and say, look, this has happened, that has happened. I'd ring and say, can you check my phone for a tracker or my car for a tracker? And they'd say, no, you need to go and get an intervention order. We'll help you when you've done that. So the day that I finally went in there, Broadmeadows Court was quiet. There was no one in there. So the clerk was able to help me. She told me to take a seat, and a magistrate saw me straight away. That's the only time I've had a good experience at Broadmeadows Court. Yeah.
At intervention order, can sometimes be referred to other states, apprehended violence order. They're an order issued by a magistrate which creates barriers, if you will, of contact for an individual like Max. And then if you break that order or any of the conditions of that order, there's grounds for arrest and prosecution, that type of thing. There's a lot of different lines of thought around these orders. Their intent is very honourable, but often those that they're taken out against are of personality types that they have little, if any, effect. Could I ask you, did it have any effect at all, taking that intervention order out?
No, none at all.
No.
None whatsoever.
Is it something he ever discussed with you? Because he would have been served with a copy of that order. Is it anything, did it ever come up in discussion or anything at all?
No. It actually took a while for him to be served. So but it was Raylene. She was this wonderful police lady at Craigieburn, and something had happened, and I'd called them and I said, well, I have an interim order, and she checked on the system and she said, we haven't received that. He hasn't been served. So I thought, oh, okay, he doesn't know that there's an order against him. So she served him that night. But, it still didn't make any difference.
Yeah. There seemed to be, and I can certainly understand your frustration, a continued sort of, I guess you'd have to put as a lack of support when you attended your local police stations. And goodness, I mean, we can talk about this in length, but there were no physical injuries. There were threats. There were veiled threats and things such as. And you seemed, you seemed to come up against a brick wall time and time again. There was some extremely pointed piece of advice that you received from a female police officer, Victorian Police. Can you share that with us, just to give a tone of the type of some of the pushback that you were getting in those early stages?
I actually think I was at Broadmeadows for that one, and she said to me, to make this go away, I'd have to quit my job, get a new car, and move. It's not that simple, and I was kind of quite annoyed. And I just basically said, why should I, love? Why should I? How about he obey the order and leave me alone? I don't really know this guy.
So those were comments made to you by a police officer after the order had been taken out, and he's breached it numerous times. And her advice was for you to get a new job, get a new car, and to perhaps move interstate and get away from it.
Well, yeah. I'd had reports all over Melbourne at this point. So where was I supposed to go? I did 2 out of the 3, and it made no difference. My youngest was in VCE. I can't just move.
And Di, there's obviously for you personally on the receiving end of this, it's just this constant feeling of pressure all the time, of never being relaxed. There was around about, sort of toward the end, I think, of 2015, he started posting flyers on places that you would visit. There was that wine bar that you would go to quite regularly. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and the impact that had on you?
Yeah, so the flyers actually started in July of 2015. The very first one I took to court with me when I was going for a full intervention order. And when I checked in at the courthouse, they said, go upstairs and the duty lawyer will be helping you. So I had my aunt with me, and we're sitting up there waiting, and the duty lawyer comes out and says, look, sorry, but we won't be helping you. We're helping the respondent, which is Max, because they had dealings with him previously. So they sent me down to legal aid, which was a waste of time because back then legal aid only helped the respondent. They didn't help the applicant. So I don't know why she sent me down there. So I had to represent myself as well, which was nerve-wracking. But luckily the magistrate was really, really nice. And I had the first flyer, handed it to the clerk who handed it to the magistrate. And then his lawyer wanted to look at that. And then she's like, well, anyone could have written this. And the magistrate didn't believe that he didn't write it. And Max actually started talking over the top of his lawyer and arguing with the magistrate, and which basically handed me the intervention order, no more questions asked, because of his attitude.
We think, be it naively or otherwise, don't we, Di, that things like this are happening, people are doing bad things. You can walk into a police station with the expectation that people are going to help you, they're going to be there to support you, the system is in place so that the good people can be protected from the bad. It would be fair to say that for you, not only are you being subjected to this on a daily basis from this individual, but the system failed you time and time again during this time. Could I ask, Di, if you're comfortable in telling me, how bad did things get for you personally, this type of pressure? Something has to give. It must have been an exceedingly dark time for you.
It was. When you've got all these flyers coming in and you're not getting, even with an intervention order, you're not getting help from police. You're, one of the conversations I had with police was not great, and I got really angry with him. And then, because he wasn't helping me in any way, shape or form, I literally screamed at him, will you help me when I'm dead? And he hung up. So, my daughter's yelling at me, Kathy's yelling at me. My daughter gets her father involved, so that created all different kinds of things happening. It was really dark. So I also had health issues. So I had been in and had carpal tunnel surgery. I had fibromyalgia. So all the medication I was on, I just thought, well, everyone hates me at this point. I may as well not be here. That was my thinking.
So you got to a point where you were thinking about taking your own life as a result of all this?
I actually tried. There was no one there to help me when I came to the next morning. I didn't call an ambulance. I probably should have. I kept calling into work sick. You've got no idea how sick I was. And that was a really bad 3 days. But then my thought process flipped and thought that, okay, you survived that, so you're here for a reason. You've got to get this guy. If I hadn't have done that, I don't know what would have happened to me.
So you got to the lowest point that anyone could get to, and you were able to climb out of that deep, deep hole with that mindset that, well, this is as bad as it gets. So I've got to fight back against this. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah,
then? Is that?
Yeah, that gave me the kickstart, because I'm thinking, I'm one of these people that, like, everything happens for a reason. So there's a reason I'm still here, and this is the reason.
Coming up, Di's stalker ups his game, but Di is determined to stop him to make sure he won't ruin her life. Di, in 2018, there was a breaking point for you with regard to Max's conduct. He visited the workplace, I think, of your youngest daughter, asking about her whereabouts. And I think, is it fair to say for you that was an absolute breaking point for you?
Yeah. So in 2017, I was looking for any kind of help whatsoever. So I joined a Facebook group called Protect Victoria, and they were having like a town hall meeting in Carnegie, and I went to that because we were going into an election in 2018. So both the parties were invited to be there, and the Today Show was there. And I thought, I'm going to give them snippets out of my diaries, because I've been writing down everything that was happening, and let them know that I wasn't getting police help and I needed assistance. So only the Liberal Party turned up. So I gave them all a copy of that letter. And within a few days, Ed O'Donoghue, who was the Shadow Police Minister back then, he contacted me, and then he contacted Lisa Neville, who was the Police Minister, and they got me a sergeant and an informant from Broadmeadows as a contact point for me going forward. So in 2018, when he went after my youngest daughter, I had already told security at Broadmeadows. They had a copy of the intervention order. They had a copy of his photo. We were in court that day, and I didn't go on the advice of the prosecutor. I went to work, but I had the worst feeling on the way to work, and I had learnt to start trusting my gut. So I rang Ash, who was the security supervisor at Broady, and I said, look, we're in court. Nothing may happen afterwards, but I just have this feeling. I said, can you just watch over Big W? I don't even know if my daughter's at work today. I forgot to ask her, because at this point I had changed jobs. So my day went from being able to walk to work to now, with travel, being a 12-hour day. So she did keep an eye on the store. She rang me about 3:30 and said that he'd been in the store for 9 minutes looking for my daughter. So my boss actually offered to drive me home. I get home and I'm ringing Ed. I'm screaming at him that he's gone after my kid. I had rung Broadmeadows and asked for the sergeant and the informant, and they weren't there. In fact, they'd been transferred and I didn't know, and nobody knew who I was. So I was back to square one. So I'm yelling and screaming at Ed O'Donoghue as well. And he gets back in touch with Lisa Neville, and that's where Beck enters the picture.
Di, this is probably a good time for us to introduce Beck, who's sitting across from you in our studio. Beck, in 2018, you're a detective senior constable in the Victorian Police. I think you'd recently been assigned to a newly formed family violence investigation unit. It was in this role around this time that you first met Di. Maybe we could get you to pick up on the story from that point forward.
That's right. I was the first detective in the unit, and I was tasked with helping the members that were there on general temporary duties to learn how to deal with complex investigations and family violence. And I remember the sergeant said to me, "We need to have a meeting with Di McDonald," who I didn't know who she was at that point. "We've had a complaint come down from the Chief Commissioner and we need to have a chat with her about what's happened." So I think from memory, I would have looked up the matter through the police system and had a read. And then I distinctly remember the day Di came in and we had a meeting with her, partly because I was quite unwell. And I remember sitting in a big boardroom across the table from Di, and I didn't know what to expect from her because the feedback that I'd been given was that she was not happy with police, and I understand why. But yeah, I remember thinking I've got my work cut out for me because she doesn't like police, and I need to try and build some rapport. But I remember sitting there with her, and she put this massive A4 folder that we would use as police briefs that didn't close properly on the table, plonked it on the table, and I was like, "What is that, Di?" And she said, it's got everything in it. And she reluctantly gave it to me because I needed to have a look at it. And I was shocked and not very happy with what I found in there because she had a copy of every statement she'd ever made, but also copies of the letters and posters that had been put up around town, but also original documents. So evidence that hadn't been received by police and sent to forensics for testing.
Beck, up until this time, part of the problem in investigate or cases such as this, particularly if we go back 10 years or so, is each time that Di goes into either Craigieburn Police Station or other stations in the area, her complaints, her grievances are dealt with by an individual officer, be they uniform or otherwise, on that particular shift. And oftentimes it becomes very compartmentalised, doesn't it? She might go in 3, 4, 5, 6 times, be dealt with by 3, 4, 5, 6 different people, and there's never a connection made between what is happening and what is going on. And the frustration there for Di and others is every time they front up, they've got to tell their whole story from the get-go again, and that momentum just gets lost each time. You're coming in at a point where you're able to pull all those strings together, and even, I guess, metaphorically, that folder that's sitting in front of you on that desk is an illustration of all those visits that Di had in all those years leading up to meeting you. Is that something that that we're improving, or the police have improved upon with regards to units like Family Violence Investigation Unit, because you can pull all that together and have one dedicated detective assigned to something like this?
I think so. The Royal Commission obviously brought in that they had to have family violence investigation units, and I guess in hindsight, it's crazy that in 2018 we were only just starting to do that. Like, it wasn't that long ago. Because, yeah, you're right, Di had reported all across Melbourne, and it was difficult for uniformed police officers to go and take a file that had occurred in a different division because there was priorities around who could take what and where it sat. So unless it was, something, a serious assault or something a little bit more serious where a detective became involved who could pull it all together, it wasn't. So, yeah, when I came in, it was great to be able to have the ability to go back and look at all of the reports, get all of the files, and have dedicated time. Family violence is incredibly busy, unfortunately. And that unit, I was incredibly busy there as well. But this was a very complex investigation that I was heavily invested in the minute I met Di.
And you started to do a little bit of a deep dive on this bloke, Max Gardner, and you uncovered a little bit of interesting history there, I think, didn't you?
I did. I was able to see there was limited history available on the system, but I could see that there had been a report of a similar incident many years ago. And through speaking to Di, I had the names of previous partners that I was able to cold call, which is not something that we would normally do, but reach out to them and see if they were willing to speak to me.
There was, I think, 4 or 5 other women over, I think, a 30-year, a 3-decade period where there had been similar type of behaviour patterns that have been presented?
Correct. That's right. And the timestamp of 30 years comes from the first police report.
Now, goodness me, we go back 30 years. I'm showing my age here. Beck, that's when I was in the job or thereabouts, and terms like coercive control, and they weren't even part of the vernacular. Nobody had heard of any of that. If you weren't physically showing signs of violence, then there was a lot of shrugging of shoulders, and we've got better things to do. Yep. I'm not at all surprised that behaviour like Max's, which has probably not really changed, it may have evolved over 30 years, but it would have been met with a bit of a brick wall 2 or 3 decades ago from the police, I would say, without any doubt.
Definitely. And the women that I spoke to, most of them wouldn't make a complaint. They were happy to speak to me and tell me their experience, but they didn't want to go ahead with criminal charges.
Now, you must have gathered enough to convince a judge or a magistrate to give you a search warrant, because you executed a warrant, I think, August 2018. Can you have a bit of a chat to us about that?
Yeah, this was a tricky case, which I'm sure you know, because there wasn't a lot of leads for me to go off. It was all circumstantial. But we were able to get the search warrant for his house, and unfortunately he wasn't home. He drove past, he knew we were there. He received a phone call and we asked him to come home, and he didn't. But yeah, we did a thorough search of the house, and I can distinctly remember the room, the kitchen dining room area, and there being a plastic shopping bag on a seat. And we'd been through, this was sort of one of the last things we looked at, to be honest. We'd been through cupboards looking for paperwork and printouts of letters and things, and picking up this bag, and in it was a balaclava and gloves. Not hidden, not tucked away anywhere, just sitting on a chair. So that was helpful. Obviously, it's not illegal to have a balaclava and gloves, but it was, again, helped the circumstantial case with the footage that we had and glove fibres and sticky tape and things like that. So it was something to compare. But also in one of the kitchen cupboards, there was the scrap paper A4 printout where it was a Facebook picture, where a picture which turns out was of Di and Kathy had been cut out and used in one of the posters. And there was a comment on it from one of Di's friends who I followed up with to try and locate that photo because it wasn't on Facebook anymore. Overall, it was a positive outcome, albeit we didn't find copious amounts of copies of print of the letters and posters. I thought he might have kept copies, but he hadn't.
It's interesting too. Cumulatively, stalking is such a shocking crime because it's just like that dripping, water into a bucket to a point where, you just literally, as Di has so openly said, you almost break somebody. Taken in isolation, posting flyers, as offensive as the flyers are, posting them up on walls and bits and pieces, it doesn't represent an offence which really carries much of a substantial punishment. So I'm interested, Beck, when you're investigating a case like this, you're getting these bits and pieces, but you need a lot of stuff to make it worthwhile for Di to take this into a courtroom environment. Would that be a fair comment?
Definitely, because as you just pointed out, stalking is a course of conduct. It's not a once-off event. And so, unfortunately, you need more than one incident to occur to create a course of conduct, which is difficult for a victim of stalking because it has to continue for us to be able to have enough evidence. And then you have to be able to have enough evidence to prove it and prove identity, which is the first point of proof and was the most difficult one for me to prove.
You went on a really interesting tangent in amongst this, Beck. You reached out to a gentleman in the States who had been a linguistic analyst for the FBI. This is a really, really interesting tangent. I'm interested in, how did you get onto that thread?
I was at a loss, to be honest. I think just to go back a little bit with that search warrant, the circumstances, I think, worked out for me because if he had have been there, he would have been arrested. We did the search warrant hoping to find something to give me enough evidence to charge. I didn't have that at that point. So I had called a detective senior sergeant from Victoria Police who was a criminal profiler and said, I'd used her before for another case and said, can you please come and see me? I need to show you a case I've got. I need some help with an interview plan. Because at that point, I didn't have enough, and I was solely relying on an admission, which is never good to lay a charge. So she came out and I showed her everything I had, and I had, charts and things of letters and timelines, and it was all very impressive to look at, I guess. And she said, have you thought about linguistic analysis? And I'm very open in saying I didn't know what that was, because it's not something that's really done. And she talked about, she studied at Quantico and she knew Jim Fitzgerald, who solved the Unabomber matter. And again, I didn't want to tell her that I didn't know what that was. A little bit young for that. But she said she would reach out to her friend Jim and see if he'd be willing to help. And the turnaround was quite quick, given he was in America. He was going to look at the way in which the letters were written and compare them to the love letters that Di had received and some court documents that we had to try and prove identity. The risk with that was there's no case law in Victoria around using linguistic evidence, so we didn't know if it was going to be accepted by the court. And also, it costs a lot of money. So Jim was happy to help. I sent over some comparison letters for him to look at, and he came back quite quickly with an outcome.
James Fitzgerald, he's a specialist in linguistic analysis. Can you, in layman's terms, just tell me what that actually means? What's that? What does he do?
So he looks at the way that we use language, and in the written sense. So it's the words you use, the way you write a paragraph, grammar, indentation, and there's maths behind it. There's a calculation that he uses to determine whether the writing that's from a known document to unknown is the same person.
Almost like a linguistic fingerprint that's left by the offender, I guess, yeah?
Yeah, and I guess you could compare it to, there's handwriting experts that look at the way that it looks and loops and the way that you might write the letter A, whereas he's using that for an overall document.
You got the documentation back from him and you went straight to the last paragraph, the last page
Yeah.
And I think the term exceptionally distinctive, which was in bold print, you knew you had something to take forward at that point, yeah?
Absolutely. There was a lot of pressure on me to solve this, and not from Di, but I guess perceived pressure on myself. But also I had to convince management to spend a lot of money on this expert in another country that we didn't know what was going to come from it. So, I skipped 20 pages and went right to the bottom, and I just wanted to know. And all my colleagues were watching me to see my reaction. And, as much as I was the informant, my team were very much invested in this case too. So that was fantastic to get that result. We needed a win. There wasn't many wins in this.
Exactly. But you're going to get, I would say without doubt, you got some fairly heavy pushback from Gardner's defence counsel on this, because there's no case law, there's no legal precedent. So you've got to put a brief together to get this admitted into court. But clearly the judge overruled their objections. I'm sure they were fairly strongly objected to this, and you got it in. And would you say that it was a fairly key piece of evidence?
I would say it was probably the strongest piece of evidence we had, really, because, as much as there was CCTV, he wore a mask, he wore gloves. The glove fibres were examined from the gloves that we seized to the fibres in the sticky tape, which they can never say that they are from those gloves, but they were of a really distinct pattern. So it was quite likely that they were. It was the only piece. And I mean, Di and I were quite disappointed that we didn't go to a contest, because Jim was going to come out and give evidence and we were going to test it and hopefully, selfishly, from a police perspective, make some case law so that other police didn't have the same concern as I did. But I mean, they obviously thought it was strong enough because he pled guilty, which was bittersweet because, again, we wanted Jim to come out.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you would know, you had a dozen or more years in the job, Beck. Generally speaking, if someone nods their head following a lockup, that's a great result, because they're into court, they're sentenced, your job's done. There's those rare occasions, and this is one where you're actually wanting him to push back so that you can bring Jim across, Jim Fitzgerald from the States, and establish this as case law. And also sometimes I think in cases like this, the more evidence that is put up before, say, a judge or a jury, the stronger the prosecution case becomes sometimes defence counsel advise their clients to plead guilty because it's better to get in and out without all that evidence being presented. So a bit of a win-loss situation there for you guys, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And I think the other thing is, in this case in particular, like, you have to assess what's best for your victim as well. And, you know, sometimes when it goes to contest, it's not good for the victim to have to go and give evidence, and they might not be in the position mentally to get through that. Whereas for Di, speaking on her behalf, I think it was disappointing because she wanted to have her say. She wanted her voice heard too. And yes, there was an opportunity through a victim impact statement, but I think Di in particular is a strong woman, and it would have been, I think, beneficial for her to give her evidence and have a judge hear it and a jury.
So I think timeline-wise, we're looking around April 2019. You turn the key on Max. He's charged, I think, with a total of 28 charges ranging from stalking, breach intervention order, intentional and reckless causing serious injury. They're the charges put up. Then we start to get the cattle trading. Of course, it goes on with pleas and one thing and another. And I think it ends up being, is it 3 stalking charges, breach intervention and a breach of bail that ends up he gets sentenced on? Am I reading that right, Beck?
Yeah, it ended up being the 3 charges. One was stalking, one was a breach of bail, and one was breach of intervention order, because they were between dates. It's frustrating because when you see 20 plus charges, it kind of sort of captures maybe the harm for as many years as it's gone on for. But when it's rolled into 1 year, albeit between dates, it sort of minimises it to be dwindled down to 3.
But you got the conviction?
Yep, we did.
And he did a stretch? He went away?
Yeah, only for 8 months, unfortunately.
Following his 8-month imprisonment term, he's out on a 2-year community corrections order. Now, that's something I just want to put the spotlight on, both you, Beck, and Di, how you feel about that. A community corrections order is, and 2 years is the maximum under legislation in Victoria at the time. It's almost like coming out on parole, and you've got all these sort of conditions, and if you breach them, you technically you're sent back inside. So he's under a community corrections order upon his release from prison. Are you able to just give the listeners a bit of an idea of how that works and what the conditions were of that order? And I'm interested, Di, also in how you felt about that with regard to your own safety when that 8 months was up, knowing that he was going to be released. Di, could you maybe jump in there?
It was 2020 when he was finally convicted and sent to jail. And Daniel Andrews, in his wisdom, allowed prisoners to receive emergency management days, so which are credits off their sentence for being in lockdown. So while I'm technically in house arrest, well, that's how I felt. We had a curfew. We had 1 hour that we could go out. We couldn't travel 5Ks out of our home. You needed a permit if you had to go into work. Yeah, so for me, I felt like I was in prison while Max was in prison, and all the while he's earning credits off his sentence. And I didn't know this. When you're a victim, they advise you to register. So the Victims Registry were contacting me every 2 weeks to update his release date. And I rang them and I'm like, why is he coming out earlier? That's when I learnt about the emergency management days. So he only served 6 months and 1 week. I, again, got in touch with Ed O'Donoghue and told him what was going on. He, and in turn, contacted the Corrections Minister, which was Natalie Hutchins at that time. She refused to revoke the 22 days that he had been credited, but she didn't add any more. So I at least had a solid date of him being released. And the sergeant at Broadmeadows, he sent 2 informants to the prison before he was released to remind him of the conditions of the community corrections order. The day of release, I had detectives, not Beck, but other detectives hovering around my house. They came to my house just to make sure I was okay. And yeah, then I was on my own. So it was a bit scary and you know, you go back to being hypervigilant, waiting for something to happen. 'Cause I always say that having a stalker is like having your own private terrorist. You know they're going to attack, but you don't know when, you don't know how or where. So I was always on alert. So that then kicked into place again. But he did obey the conditions of the CCO. I think he was scared to go back inside jail had he breached it in any way. So when it ran out in 2023, again, on high alert.
Di, you mentioned about the emergency management days and how that can reduce the sentence of someone who's incarcerated. Can I just get you to clarify what that was during COVID? That was a state legislation in Victoria. Can you just explain what that means specifically?
Okay, so emergency management days first came about for when there were prison riots and the prisoners were locked in their cells for X amount of time while they sort out the riot. But during COVID, they brought them back in because they were again being locked in their cells for however long.
Right. So it was linking the COVID, meaning that prisoners couldn't interact socially with other prisoners because of COVID restrictions. So they're kept in their cells for longer and they get a good behaviour type bond for each day or a certain period of time that they're in that cell. Right. Beck, for somebody like Di, she's in this situation. The offender's released from prison. He comes out. He's under a community corrections order. Can you just give some explanation as to the sort of conditions that are within an order, and they're different for each case, and also what leverage the police have if those conditions are broken?
Yeah.
It would have mimicked the order because Di had a full order in place. Which
is still current because I was given a 10-year order, so that's actually still current.
And so that would be putting conditions such as prohibiting him from having contact with you by phone, by social media, not being able to come within a certain distance of where you live, where you work, and things like that. And also, did it extend to any contact or communication with family members and things such as that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Other than my youngest daughter, no. No, there were no other family members. No.
And Beck, if an individual who's under a CCO, if they breach one of those conditions, could you just explain what Di could do there and what the response should be from the police?
It's a pretty powerful thing to be on, really, because if he committed any offence whilst on a CCO, he could be arrested and brought back before the court and have that overturned and put back into prison. So it wouldn't necessarily have to have something to do with Di. It could be as simple as a shop theft. Any criminal offence would bring him back before the court, which is something that, when you're trying to make the best of a situation and explain to Di why a 2-year CCO is a good thing. It's a long time to be under such scrutiny, but I guess not long enough either.
So 2023, Di, the community corrections orders lifted. There must have been, I don't mean to in any way put words in your mouth, but was that a time where you felt almost a little vulnerable? I know there was still an intervention order in place, which is there's a 10-year order there, and they're similar, but that there's a level of protection that on that day is no longer there when it was there yesterday. Does that leave you feeling a little exposed?
Yes. Yeah, because I knew that he didn't really respect the intervention order. He obviously took the CCO very seriously. But yeah, I'm happy to say that he did leave us alone. And
here we are, what are we, May 2025, and touch wood, can we say that you've had no further contact since his incarceration?
None. I have, in January of this year, of 2025, sold my house. So I've gone to great lengths to hide where I am.
Just a reminder that if you or someone you know is at risk, go to the police. The website with all the resources and information is www.sada.au. And her book, telling her story, is out now wherever you get your books. It's called From Roses to Terror. Join us next week for another episode of Crime Insiders Forensics. It will be in your feed early Monday morning.